front pages today, they stack up like this, beginning with the Mirror.
Yeah, the Mirror has President Zelensky's plea to Putin to sit down and talk. It pictures bombed-out apartments on the outskirts of Kiev.
The Times says President Putin is after total victory. It shows a father saying goodbye to his children as part of the evacuation effort.
Meanwhile, The Guardian says 2 more oligarchs are now facing UK sanctions. The paper also shows a father crying over the body of his teenage son in Mariupol. That's on a lot of the papers today, and it's very heartbreaking.
Sad, yeah. Here's the Metro. It says more than 1 million refugees have now fled Ukraine, something we'll be talking about very shortly.
Meanwhile, I think the Express... have I got the Express here? Oops. Again, saying, I think what we all feel, isn't it? In God's name, Putin, stop the suffering.
Well, let's talk about those newspapers and what's inside them now. We've got Brigadier Paul Gibson, former commander of the Black Rats, former director of a counter-terrorism and UK operations. He's now defence and security consultant. And beside him, Joanna Williams, who's an author and academic. And Paul, it's you we're starting with, and that warning from Putin that the worst is yet to come.
Yes, well, the Daily Telegraph piece is quite compelling. It talks about Macron's call with Putin, which lasted 90 minutes, and Macron came off that call very clear that Putin is determined to pursue his military operations. And in parallel to that, we have Putin's state address, which the Telegraph references, where Putin is unapologetic about what he's doing. He's saying that the military operation is going extremely well, which it clearly isn't. I mean, the Russians are going much slower than expected. They're not getting their objectives that they wanted to. But for public consumption, Putin is talking it up, that they are going well, and they are going to keep going. So it's absolutely chilling, this article in the Telegraph.
I mean, the fact that he said the worst is yet to come, and he said it to Macron, didn't he, means that, as you said, it's for public consumption, but it does reflect the fact that he doesn't see that there's anything wrong in what he's doing, and he will not be talked out of it.
Yeah. And I think militarily, the Russian forces are getting frustrated. If you look at that convoy to the north of Kiev...
we look at it every day and we wonder why it's still there.
But the lineup, that is not a military operation. That is a convoy of logistic vehicles that was expecting to be waved on by cheering Ukrainians into the capital city. It's now bogged down. It's being attacked by Ukrainian forces. It's in the mud. Vehicles are breaking down.
See, I'm glad to hear that, but because we're not seeing that.
Yeah. But I think we have to be a little bit careful, because there's also a report in the newspaper today, I think it's the Telegraph, where it's saying that the reason why this convoy is stuck is simply because it's an opportunity for them to regroup, for them to get more missiles. And I think we need to take this situation incredibly seriously. And I take Putin at his word when he says the worst is yet to come. Unfortunately, I mean, I really wish I could get kind of carried away. I know that seems a very flippant way of putting it, but I would love the romantic story of the kind of brave Ukrainians succeeding and beating back the kind of Russian bear.
That's what I fear, that it's wishful thinking.
Exactly. I think we've got to be so careful to take this very, very seriously.
No, I think we're all taking it very seriously. I think what has surprised the Russians is the level of resistance from the Ukrainian forces, and they have been very clever. For example, in the very early days of last week, they switched off their air defence systems. So they were not sending a signal where their systems were, so the Russians couldn't pick them up. They've spread them all over, so they're difficult to find. So the Russians would have expected by now to have complete air dominance. They have not got it. The Russians are losing helicopters, they're losing fast aircraft, being shot down by Ukrainians. Also, the Ukrainians are doing very well with sort of small groups operating with anti-tank weapon systems and destroying Russian tanks. So this has surprised the Russians. So I'm not underestimating how serious this is.
No, I agree completely. I mean, the Ukrainian bravery, I think, has inspired people all around the world, and it's an amazing thing to see, and I really cheer them on. But like I say, I'm just concerned that we don't underestimate how serious this situation is.
Joanna, we're now going to find out how good the Ukrainian negotiating skills are. The Mirror, this is page 1 there, and they're saying that President Zelensky is asking Vladimir Putin to sit down for talks.
Well, I think this is a very important move. It's a very significant development. I think tragically, if we look at end scenarios, how is this situation going to play out? I mean, tragically, either it's going to be complete disaster for the Ukrainian people when the full force of the Russian military might does get going, which I'm convinced it will do, or we reach some negotiated settlement. And I think what's really important now for the West, perhaps as well, is that we do leave a way out, much as it's a horrible thing to have to contemplate for Putin. He needs to be able to walk away from the situation.
What could possibly be the compromise that they could possibly reach? You can't even think.
No, exactly. It's very, very difficult. But that's, unfortunately, unless it's going to escalate into a major global conflict, which would seem to come down to a nuclear war, which is too terrible to have to think about, or the complete military annihilation of Ukraine, the only third possible option we can contemplate is some negotiated settlement.
Is to give up some land.
So, whatever that compromise
It has to be
might
land,
be.
Paul, hasn't it? It has to be a land grab.
Yes. I mean, I think, look, I mean, it's good that they're talking and they've agreed humanitarian corridors. I mean, they haven't implemented that, but they've agreed it. So there are already some areas for agreement. But it is quite clear, particularly in the south, that Putin has very strong objectives. So he's pushed up from Crimea. He wants to link through to the Donbass region. And there's a lot of speculation that he's going to go after Odessa, which will, prevent the Ukrainians getting supplies from the sea. So that's where his interest is, and a stranglehold around Kiev. But there's, I think, something around declaration by Ukraine about what its future, where its future lies. This whole business about NATO membership. I think there's some areas for negotiation there. But at the moment, the two sides are poles apart.
Meanwhile, as you're just pointing to the front of the metro there, 1 million refugees a week. Apparently, that's according to the UNHCR. I mean, that is a massive humanitarian crisis.
Massive. Statistics say, paint quite an interesting picture. This is the greatest exodus of refugees this century. You can see from the picture on the metro that just the sheer horror of two things, really, that picture tells you about how families are being split up and people having to leave the country that they wish to remain in. And then that residential block,
Cleaved
in rubble.
in two.
Yeah, cleaved in two. So really, really difficult. And I think, again, militarily, as the Russian commanders get frustrated by their slow progress, the reliance on heavier weapons, their missiles and artillery systems will come more to the fore. And you will see more of this destruction in urban areas.
I think it's no surprise that so many people are fleeing, and certainly if I was in Ukraine with my children, I'd be desperate to get out and looking for any route. I think we also need to spare a thought perhaps for Poland and Hungary, the two countries that are really bearing the brunt of this refugee crisis, taking in hundreds.
They're doing so very willingly, though, and
absolutely
with open arms.
And I think that's a really important point, Anne, because both Poland and Hungary tend to be demonised a little bit in the eyes of the EU as being these kind of slightly backward states that the EU is almost a little bit embarrassed about. And you see they've really stepped up to the plate. And
historically, though, they've had such a terrible time because of literally just because of the geography of where they are.
Yeah.
Last night, a worrying situation. There were missiles landing near a nuclear power station, Zaporizhzhia. And we're not exactly sure what damage is involved in this one. There was a fire, though, at the plant.
No, this is very, very concerning. And obviously, when we've been speaking about nuclear, the word nuclear, if you like, in the context of this conflict, the major concern has been nuclear weapons and the potential for our nuclear bombs to be dropped, to put it bluntly. Whereas obviously the prospect of an attack, even a regular non-nuclear attack, but being waged against a nuclear power station, could have equally disastrous consequences for the region. I mean, again, perhaps coming back to what we were talking about in relation to the negotiations, I mean, perhaps that's one thing that I would certainly put on the list if I was responsible for those negotiations, an agreement not
The latest news seems to be suggesting that the fire is out, or at least under control, which is good news.
Brigadier Gibson, let's talk defence matters now. This is a comment piece in the Times by James Forsyth. So if defence is to benefit or given the resources that it needs, who suffers?
Well, that's an interesting question. Yeah, I mean, the piece points rightly to, you could argue that deterrence, well, I think it's an easy argument to make, that deterrence has failed. We did not deter Putin. And so now people are very quickly going back to the drawing board. What did we get wrong? Did the strategic review, integrated review, did that cover all the bases? Probably not. We tilted, the UK has tilted towards the Pacific, doing a lot with Japan and elsewhere. Actually, the threats here in Europe are with Russia, and they've got conventional equipment. Do we have enough to deter that in the future? So a lot of discussion around this, and a lot of discussion around the German defence budget being increased to over 2% of GDP. But politically, this is really difficult. We've already had a hike in the defence budget. And with people, really struggling at the moment, whether there is a political appetite when this settles to put more money into defence, I don't know. But from a military perspective, boy, do we need more resources to properly deter aggression of this nature in the future.
That is a great question, actually, maybe to throw out to anybody watching at the moment. Has this situation given you the appetite to put more money into our defences?